Greetings, warriors and dreamers. Welcome to the realms of sleep, where tonight we journey through the epic world of God of War. I am your guide through the 9 realms, where ancient gods whisper their secrets and mythic landscapes unfold before us. From the frost-covered mountains of Midgard to the golden halls of Asgard, these tales of gods and giants will carry you into peaceful slumber. Lay down your weapons, rest your weary head, and allow the legends of these powerful beings to become the landscape of your dreams. The battles have been fought, and now is the time for rest. So close your eyes, brave one. Let the fire of the hearth warm you as we begin our journey through realms both wondrous and dangerous. The last rays of sunlight retreated behind the distant mountains as Atreus added another small branch to his modest campfire. The warmth pushed back against the evening chill that had begun to settle across the forest clearing. He had not intended to be alone as nightfall approached, but a simple hunting expedition had led him farther from the cabin than anticipated. Rather than risk the treacherous terrain in growing darkness, he had made the decision his father would approve of. Establish a secure position and wait for daylight. Earlier that morning, as dawn had just begun to color the eastern sky, Atreus had set out from the cabin he shared with his father. Kratos had departed 2 days prior to hunt larger game in the northern valleys, leaving Atreus with clear instructions to maintain their home and practice his skills within the familiar territory surrounding it. The boy had dutifully split wood for the hearth, practiced his archery against various targets he'd arranged among the trees, and studied the runes his mother had taught him before her passing. But as the second day of solitude stretched before him, Atreus had felt a restless energy building within. Not quite rebellion against his father's precautions, but a desire to test his growing capabilities and independence. The forest had called to him with its morning sounds, promising discovery for those attentive enough to read its signs. After a moment's hesitation, he had gathered his bow, quiver, and hunting knife, leaving a clear indication of his intended direction should Kratos return before him. Just a short hunt, he had assured himself, following the tracks of rabbits that had visited the garden patch near their cabin. Close enough to be home by midday. The initial pursuit had gone exactly as planned. The trail clear, the game plentiful, his arrows finding their marks with increasing accuracy that reflected months of dedicated practice. But as morning turned to afternoon, Atreus had spotted tracks of a deer. Not the large buck that would have interested his father, but a yearling that would provide meat enough for several days, while still being manageable for him to transport alone. The decision to follow this more ambitious quarry had led him steadily eastward, into a section of forest he had visited only occasionally with Kratos. The terrain grew gradually less familiar, though not enough to cause concern in the daylight hours. When he finally brought down the young deer with a well-placed shot, satisfaction had momentarily overshadowed his awareness of the lowering sun and the considerable distance he had traveled. By the time he had dressed the deer and secured the best portions of meat in his pack, leaving the remainder for the forest's scavengers, as his mother had taught him to do, the sun had dipped significantly toward the western horizon. Looking up through the canopy to gauge the daylight remaining, Atreus had made his first truly independent hunter's decision: to make camp, rather than risk a hasty return through increasingly shadowed woodland. Safety before speed, Kratos had reminded him countless times. The forest claims the hurried and the careless without distinction. These words had come after Atreus had once twisted his ankle, attempting to return to their cabin as darkness fell, the resulting injury requiring several days of recovery that might have been avoided with more prudent decision-making. His father had not berated him exactly, but the lesson had been delivered with the unmistakable gravity that accompanied Kratos' most important teachings. The darkness hides not just obstacles, he had explained while binding the swollen ankle, but transforms familiar paths into deceptions. What seems certain becomes treacherous, the confident become fools. But what about when we must travel at night? Atreus had asked, always seeking the boundaries of any rule presented to him. Kratos had met his gaze directly then. When necessity demands it, we move differently, slower, more deliberately, with greater awareness. His large hand had rested briefly on Atreus' shoulder, but never from poor planning when alternatives exist. Atreus smiled faintly at the memory of his father's gruff wisdom. Though Kratos rarely elaborated beyond such practical statements, the truth within them had proven reliable. The woods transformed at night, familiar paths becoming deceptive under moonlight's silver glow, ordinary sounds taking on new significance in the darkness. Even with his growing skills as a hunter and tracker, Atreus respected these changes enough to heed his father's counsel. The fire crackled softly as he adjusted his position on the fallen log that served as his seat. His bow rested within arm's reach, quiver still containing most of the arrows he'd departed with that morning. The hunt had been moderately successful. 2 rabbits and portions of the deer, now skinned and cooking on improvised spits above the flames. Their scent mingled with the smoke, creating an aroma that reminded him of countless meals prepared alongside his father during their journey. He had selected this particular clearing with care, following another of Kratos' practical guidelines for wilderness survival. Choose elevated ground, with clear sight lines when possible, back to stone or dense thicket, near water but not so close that creatures seeking it will stumble upon you. This small opening in the forest canopy met these requirements admirably. Situated on a gentle rise, with a massive boulder formation creating natural shelter on one side, dense undergrowth on another, and relatively open forest on the approaches that would make it difficult for anything to reach him undetected. A small stream trickled nearby, providing necessary water without the risks associated with larger water bodies where predators might gather at night. Preparing the camp had occupied him fully as daylight faded. Gathering appropriate firewood that would burn steadily without excessive smoke. Arranging stones to contain the flames. Constructing simple spits from green wood that wouldn't burn through during cooking. Cleaning his kills efficiently to minimize scent that might attract unwanted attention. Each task executed with the methodical attention his father had instilled. Each step performed in proper sequence without wasted motion or unnecessary haste. As he worked, Atreus had found himself humming softly, one of his mother's songs, a gentle melody she would often sing while preparing meals or working with plants in her garden. The familiar tune brought comfort in the growing solitude, connecting him to memories of warmth and security, even as night descended around his isolated position. Above the tree line, stars had begun to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. One by one at first, then in clusters and constellations as true darkness spread across the heavens. Among them, Mani, the moon, rose full and luminous, casting the forest in ethereal silver light that filtered through the branches in dappled patterns across the clearing floor. He recognized the constellations as they emerged, the Great Bear wheeling slowly overhead, the hunter with his distinctive belt of 3 aligned stars, the dragon coiling sinuously across the northern quadrant. Faye had taught him their names and stories, explaining how travelers had used them since time immemorial to find their way when other landmarks failed. The stars remain constant when all else changes, she had told him, her voice patient as she guided his young finger from point to point in the night sky. Mountains may crumble, forests burn and regrow, rivers change their courses, but the patterns above maintain their positions relative to one another across generations. She had shown him how to locate the North Star, the fixed point around which the others appeared to rotate through the night. When uncertain of direction, find this one, she had instructed. It has guided countless lost travelers home throughout the ages. Money watches over those who travel by night, his mother had told him once, her voice gentle as she pointed toward the glowing orb. When you see his full face, remember that you are never truly alone in the darkness. The memory of Faye brought a familiar ache, dulled by time but never fully absent. Her stories had often centered on the natural world and its rhythms, tales not of gods and their machinations, but of the earth, sky, and creatures that existed in harmony with ancient forces. She had taught him to listen to the forest, to understand its language beyond mere survival knowledge. That teaching served him now as he settled into the quiet solitude of his temporary camp. On evenings like this, when the boundary between his present circumstances and memories of his mother seemed particularly thin, Atreus sometimes found himself speaking aloud to her, not from belief that she could literally hear him, but as a way to maintain connection with her wisdom and perspective. "I think you would approve of this camp, Mother," he said softly, eyes following the dance of flames before him. "I remembered everything you taught me about respecting the forest while taking shelter within it." He had, indeed, followed Faye's ecological principles alongside Kratos' tactical ones, gathering only dead wood for his fire, taking only what game he needed, positioning everything to minimize his impact on the surrounding environment. His mother had emphasized these considerations not merely from practical conservation, but from deeper philosophical understanding of humans' place within natural systems. "We are not separate from the world around us," she had explained while showing him how to harvest herbs without destroying their root systems. "We are threads in the same great weaving. Pull too roughly on one strand, and the entire pattern suffers." The forest was never truly silent, Atreus knew. Even in the deepest night, life continued its eternal patterns. His trained ear caught the distant hooting of an owl, the rustle of small creatures moving through underbrush, the whispering song of wind through pine needles. These sounds formed a natural chorus that eased his mind as he watched the meat slowly cook over the flames. Years of practice had developed his ability to distinguish between ordinary forest sounds and those that might indicate potential danger. The owl's regular calls suggested normal hunting behavior rather than response to disturbance. The small rustlings nearby carried the distinctive patterns of mice and voles going about their nocturnal business. Even the wind spoke to him through its effects. No sudden silences that might indicate larger predators moving through the underbrush. No abrupt directional shifts that could signal approaching storms. When the first wolf howl echoed across the distance, Atreus straightened, instantly alert. The sound came from the north, long, mournful, and penetrating in the night air. Not threatening, but a declaration of presence, a communication to others of its kind. He tilted his head, listening with the concentration his mother had taught him. The howl carried information beyond mere sound, its pitch, duration, and modulation, revealing details about the sender to those who knew how to interpret such communications. This was not the desperate call of a lone wolf seeking its pack, nor the aggressive territorial warning that might precede conflict. Instead, It carried the confident, relaxed quality of an established pack member, communicating from a position of security. Atreus had learned to distinguish these nuances through hours spent listening alongside his mother on nights when wolf calls had drifted down from the hills surrounding their home. Faye had possessed remarkable ability to interpret animal communications, treating them not as random noises, but as sophisticated language systems with their own grammar and vocabulary. Listen beyond the sound itself, she would instruct, her own head tilted in the same posture Atreus now unconsciously adopted. Hear the intention beneath, the emotion carried on the breath. Animals speak with their entire bodies, their entire beings. The howl is merely the portion that travels farthest. A second howl answered from the east, then a third from somewhere more distant. The wolves were calling to one another, establishing territory and position as they had done since time immemorial. Atreus found himself smiling as he recognized the pattern. This was not the anxious communication that preceded a hunt, but rather the comfortable exchange of a pack settling for the evening. Their songs carry ancient wisdom, Faye had told him during a similar night years before, when wolf calls had drifted down from the hills near their cabin. They speak to each other of what they have seen, where food can be found, which paths are safe to travel. Atreus removed the rabbits from the fire when they had cooked through, setting them aside to cool slightly before eating. As he did so, his gaze was drawn to the tree line, where moonlight created a stark contrast between silver-bathed clearings and the deep shadows beneath. Sadly, he thought he saw movement, a darker shape shifting against the already dark background. He remained still, hand not quite reaching for his bow, but ready to move if necessary. The shape emerged slowly from the shadows. A wolf, larger than most he had encountered, its coat a mixture of grey and silver that seemed to capture and reflect the moonlight. It stood at the edge of the clearing, amber eyes fixed on Atreus with an intelligence that transcended ordinary animal awareness. Neither boy nor wolf moved for several heartbeats. There was no aggression in the animal's posture, no tensed muscles or bared teeth that would signal imminent attack. Instead, it observed him with what Atreus could only describe as curious assessment, as if measuring him against some standard known only to itself. "I mean no harm," Atreus said softly, the words emerging instinctively, though he knew the wolf could not understand their literal meaning. Yet communication often transcended language, as both his parents had taught him in different ways. Intention, energy, and respect could bridge gaps between species, just as they might between different peoples. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, head tilting slightly as if considering the tone rather than the words themselves. After another moment of mutual observation, it lowered itself to a sitting position at the forest's edge, still watching Atreus, but clearly indicating it had no immediate intention of either approaching further or retreating. Something about this behavior struck Atreus as unusual. Wolves typically avoided human contact, particularly when alone rather than with their pack. This one's deliberate approach and subsequent peaceful stance suggested purpose beyond random encounter. The teachings of his mother rose in his memory, her stories of animals who sometimes acted as messengers or guides when humans found themselves at significant crossroads. The ancient Northmen believed that wolves carried wisdom from Odin himself, she had explained during one winter evening beside their hearth. Not as servants, but as beings who moved between worlds, gathering knowledge no human could access alone. Atreus carefully lifted one of the cooked rabbits, considering the hungry animal that might see an easy meal in his catch. With deliberate movements, he separated a portion of the meat and placed it on a flat stone at the edge of his campfire's light, close enough to be reached without the wolf needing to approach too near his position, yet far enough that it would not feel threatened. "You're welcome to share," he said, gesturing toward the offering before returning to his seat. The wolf remained motionless for several minutes, its gaze shifting between Idris and the offered food. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, it advanced into the clearing, each movement measured and precise, maintaining awareness of the distance between them. When it reached the stone, it sniffed the meat carefully before taking it with surprising gentleness. Rather than retreat immediately with its prize, the wolf consumed the rabbit portion where it stood, amber eyes occasionally lifting to meet Atreus's watching gaze. There was something almost ceremonial in the interaction, a sharing rather than mere feeding, an exchange that held meaning beyond the simple act itself. When it had finished, the wolf raised its head toward the moon, now high overhead in the night sky. A howl rose from its throat, not the loud, carrying sound that had echoed across distances earlier, but something softer, almost melodic, directed seemingly at both the moon above and Atreus himself. "You're welcoming me," Atreus whispered, understanding without knowing precisely how. "Acknowledging me as a guest in your territory." The wolf lowered its gaze back to Atreus, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw something like approval in those intelligent eyes. Then, with deliberate purpose, it turned and walked several paces toward the forest edge, stopping to look back at him in what could only be interpreted as an invitation to follow. Atreus hesitated, years of his father's warnings about unknown paths at night weighing against his curiosity. Yet something deeper than rational thought pulled at him, an instinct connected to his mother's teachings about listening to the natural world when it offered guidance. The wolf exhibited no threatening behavior, and its deliberate actions suggested purpose rather than predatory intent. "My father would tell me to stay by the fire," Atreus muttered to himself. Yet even as he spoke, he found himself gathering his bow and securing the quiver at his hip. Taking a burning branch from the fire to serve as a torch, he stood and took a tentative step toward the waiting wolf. But Mother would say some guides appear only once, and wisdom comes to those who recognize the moment. The wolf watched his approach with what appeared to be patience, waiting until Atreus drew near before turning to lead the way into the forest. It moved at an unhurried pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure the boy followed, choosing paths where moonlight penetrated the canopy enough to illuminate the ground. They traveled in this manner for what might have been half an hour, the wolf selecting routes that avoided difficult terrain, leading Atreus deeper into the woods than he had ventured during his hunt. Though normal caution would have suggested danger in such a journey, the boy felt a curious sense of security in following this unusual guide. The forest itself seemed differently arranged around them, not physically altered, but somehow more welcoming, as if the very atmosphere acknowledged their passage. The trees gradually thinned as they approached what appeared to be another clearing. The wolf paused at its edge, waiting for Atreus to draw alongside before proceeding further. When they entered the open space together, Atreus couldn't suppress a soft gasp of wonder. Before them spread a perfectly circular meadow, perhaps 50 paces across, surrounded by ancient pines, whose uppermost branches framed a perfect view of the night sky above. The full moon illuminated the space as if it were designed specifically to capture its light, the center featuring a small pond whose surface reflected the celestial bodies overhead like a perfect mirror. Around this pond, arranged in a loose semicircle, sat 3 more wolves of varying colors. One nearly white, one dark as shadow, and one with russet fur that appeared almost red in the moonlight. "A meeting place," Atreus whispered, understanding instinctively. The arrangement was too deliberate, too purposeful to be mere coincidence. The wolves turned their heads in unison at his arrival, regarding him with the same intelligent assessment his guide had shown at their first encounter. His silver-grey companion moved forward into the clearing, approaching the others with what Atreus recognized as deferential body language. A brief exchange of soft growls and subtle movements followed. Communication Atreus couldn't understand in detail, but recognized as discussion about his presence. The white wolf, clearly the eldest of the group judging by the grey around its muzzle, rose and approached Atreus with dignified steps. Unlike the wariness he might have expected, this wolf moved with confidence that suggested no fear of humans, perhaps even familiarity with them. When it reached him, it sat directly before him, eyes level with his own, as he knelt to meet its gaze. In those eyes, Atreus saw awareness that transcended ordinary animal consciousness. Not human intelligence, but something equally complex in its own way, shaped by generations of survival, community, and adaptation to the rhythms of the natural world. There was wisdom there, different from the knowledge found in books or taught by parents, yet no less valuable for its distinction. "You wanted me to come here," Atreus said softly, "to show me something." The white wolf made no sound in response, but its gaze remained fixed on his face with such intensity that Atreus felt compelled to remain still and open to whatever message might be conveyed. The moment stretched between them, filled with something more profound than silence, a connection that required no words, yet carried meaning nonetheless. Gradually, Atreus became aware of changes in the clearing around them. The moonlight seemed to intensify, casting everything in clearer illumination than should have been possible even under the full moon's glow. The pond's surface began to ripple despite no wind disturbing it, the reflected stars and moon fragmenting into patterns that shifted and reformed continuously. A howl rose from the dark wolf's throat, low at first, then building to a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air of the clearing. One by one the others joined, including Atreus' silver guide, their voices blending in harmonies that no ordinary wolves could produce. The sound enveloped him, resonating not just in his ears, but somehow within his chest, his mind, his very being. Atreus closed his eyes instinctively, overwhelmed by the sensory experience, yet not frightened by it. As darkness claimed his vision, the howls transformed in his perception, no longer just animal sounds, but something carrying meaning, images, impressions that formed in his thoughts as if remembered rather than newly experienced. He saw the forest as it had been centuries before, younger in some ways, older in others, inhabited by people whose lives were interwoven with the land in ways modern dwellers had forgotten. He witnessed seasonal rituals conducted in this very clearing, humans and wolves observing each other across distances that were both physical and metaphysical, each recognizing the other's place in the greater pattern of existence. The images shifted, showing him glimpses of his mother, younger than he had ever known her, walking these same paths with a wolf at her side that appeared strikingly similar to his silver guide. They moved through the forest with matched steps, neither leading nor following, but traveling as companions with shared purpose. In these visions, Faye's face showed an openness, a connection to her surroundings, that Atreus recognized from his own limited memories, yet somehow even more pronounced in her younger self. "She knew you," Atreus whispered, the realization flowing through him with certainty. "She was welcome here, as I am now." The howling continued, the images evolving to show him patterns of movement through the forest, paths that aligned with celestial positions, routes that followed subtle energies flowing beneath the earth, ways of traversing the land that honored its inherent nature rather than imposing human convenience. These were not merely physical trails, but approaches to movement itself, philosophies of passage encoded in the wolves' ancestral knowledge, and shared now with him. When the howls finally diminished and Atreus opened his eyes, he found the clearing transformed yet again. The wolves remained in their positions, but the moonlight now revealed symbols etched into the ground around the pond. Ancient markings, partially obscured by grass and time, yet still discernible to the attentive observer. He recognized elements of the script his mother had taught him, mixed with older forms that even she had only partially understood. The white wolf rose and moved toward these markings, stopping at one particular symbol that resembled a tree, with branches extending both upward towards sky and downward into earth. It looked at Atreus expectantly, clearly indicating the marking held significance he should understand. "Balance," Atreus said tentatively, recalling his mother's teachings about this particular symbol. The connection between what lies above and what rests below. The visible and invisible aspects of existence held in harmony. The wolf dipped its head slightly, as if acknowledging his interpretation before moving to another marking. This one depicting a series of interlocked circles, each containing what appeared to be different phases of the moon.
"Cycles,"
Atreus continued, following the wolf's guidance. Time's circular nature rather than linear progression. The return of patterns across different scales. He paused, considering deeper implications. The idea that endings lead to new beginnings, just as the moon wanes, only to become full again. Each symbol the wolf indicated built upon the previous, creating not just individual concepts, but an interconnected philosophy. A way of understanding the world that extended beyond simple survival knowledge into profound relationship with natural forces. Atreus recognized elements his mother had taught him, yet contextualized now within a larger framework that clarified their origins and purposes. As they completed the circuit of the pond, returning to where the other wolves still sat in watchful attendance, Atreus felt a growing awareness that this encounter represented more than chance meeting. The wolves had called him here deliberately, recognizing something in him that warranted sharing their ancient knowledge. Perhaps the same quality they had seen in his mother years before. "You knew I would understand," he said, addressing all four wolves equally. "That I would listen, as she did." The dark wolf rose then, approaching to stand beside the white elder. Together they gazed at Atreus with such focused attention that he felt momentarily transparent before them, as if they could see beyond his physical presence to something deeper, some essential quality invisible to ordinary perception. A new howl began, different from the earliest symphonic blend, this one coming solely from the dark wolf, its timbre so deep it seemed to emerge from the earth itself rather than the animal's throat. The sound carried no visions this time, but instead evoked emotions in careful sequence. Caution, followed by curiosity, Hesitation transformed to courage. Isolation transformed to courage. Isolation transformed to courage. Isolation transformed to courage. Atreus recognized this emotional journey as his own, the path he had traveled since his mother's passing, learning to navigate the world alongside his father while discovering his own unique place within it. When the dark wolf fell silent, the russet one stepped forward, adding its voice to the moonlit clearing. Where the previous howl had spoken to his past, this one somehow conveyed possibilities, potential futures that spread before him like branching paths in a forest, each determined by choices large and small, yet none predetermined beyond alteration. Atreus saw glimpses of himself in various circumstances, standing alongside his father, facing unknown challenges, traveling distant lands, guided by stars unfamiliar to his current knowledge, sharing wisdom with others as it was being shared with him now. Possibilities, he whispered, understanding flowing through him. Not fate, but potential awaiting choice. His silver guide joined the communication last, its howl lighter yet no less profound, speaking of balance between seemingly opposing forces, strength and compassion, action and reflection, independence and connection. In this song, Atreus recognized teachings from both his parents. Kratos' emphasis on capability and self-reliance, blended with Faye's attunement to broader patterns and interdependence, not contradictions requiring choice between them, but complementary aspects of wisdom that achieved greatest potential when held in balance. As the final howl faded into the night, the four wolves gathered closer, forming a tight circle around Atreus. There was no threat in their proximity, only a sense of acknowledgement, of welcome into understanding normally kept beyond human awareness. The white elder touched its nose briefly to Atreus's hand, the contact sending a warm current through him, unlike anything he had experienced before. In that moment of connection, words formed in Atreus's mind with perfect clarity, not his own thoughts, but communication received with undeniable directness. The wolf walks between worlds, neither fully wild nor entirely tame, understanding both, yet belonging fully to neither. This is your path as well, young one, to stand at the threshold between different ways of being, bearing witness to each while creating something new through your passage. The blood that flows through you carries many stories, some gentle, others fierce, all necessary. The white wolf stepped back, its message delivered, allowing the dark one to approach next. Its contact brought different sensation, cool like shadow yet not unpleasant, a reminder of necessary darkness that gives meaning to light. Fear serves when it protects, harms when it controls. Learn to distinguish between caution born of wisdom and hesitation born of doubt. The strongest predator knows when to advance and when to withdraw, when to howl and when to move in silence. Power lies not in constant demonstration, but in perfect timing. The decisive moment recognized and seized without hesitation. The russet wolf followed, its touch bringing warmth like early autumn sunlight filtering through changing leaves. Change comes to all things in their season. Resistance brings suffering. Acceptance brings growth. The wolf sheds its coat with the turning year, neither clinging to what has served its purpose, nor rushing what is not yet ready to emerge. Your nature transforms as it should. Honor what has been, welcome what approaches. Trust the rhythm that carries you between states of being. Finally, his silver guide completed the circle, its message carrying synthesis of all that came before. You were brought here because you can bridge understandings that remain separate for most. The wolf recognizes its kin across great distances, through darkness and storm, beyond barriers that seem impenetrable to others. So too must you recognize connection where others see only division. This is both gift and responsibility, to translate between worlds that believe themselves isolated from one another, to walk paths that connect rather than separate. When the last message faded from his awareness, Atreus found himself seated beside the pond, the four wolves arranged around him in perfect formation, north, south, east, and west, their postures reflecting protection rather than containment. Above them, the moon had begun its westward journey, indicating several hours had passed since he had left his campfire. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing more elaborate expressions were unnecessary. The wolves had shared according to their nature. Gratitude was the appropriate response according to his. As if this acknowledgement marked the conclusion of their purpose, the wolves rose in unison. The russet and dark ones departed first, slipping into the forest shadows with fluid grace that left barely a trace of their passing. The white elder remained a moment longer, its aged eyes holding Atreus's gaze in final communication that required no translation, a recognition of potential seen and responsibility conferred. When it too had gone, only his silver guide remained. Unlike their journey to the clearing, the wolf now moved to walk beside rather than before him, adjusting its pace to match his human stride. Together they traversed the moonlit forest, following paths that somehow seemed clearer than they had on the outward journey, as if Atreus' perception had been subtly adjusted by the experience in the wolves' gathering place. The night around them pulsed with life and meaning, each sound and shadow carrying significance beyond mere physical presence. Atreus found himself noticing patterns he had overlooked before, how certain trees grew in relationship to particular stars overhead, how animal trails followed subtle contours of the land that channeled unseen energies, how the very air changed quality in different sections of the forest, depending on what lived and had lived there over countless generations. This wasn't magic, as he had come to understand it through runes and incantations, but a more fundamental awareness, the original knowing that preceded formalized practice, the direct perception that gave rise to systems later codified into teachable forms. His mother had possessed this awareness naturally. He now recognized it, awakening within himself through the wolves' guidance. When they reached the edge of the clearing, where his campfire still burned low, the silver wolf paused, turning to face Atreus directly. No further message was conveyed, yet understanding passed between them nonetheless. Acknowledgement that what had been shared could not be fully processed in a single night, but would unfold gradually through reflection and application. "I'll remember," Atreus promised, knowing the wolf would comprehend his meaning, if not his exact words. "And I'll return when the time is right." The wolf dipped its head in what appeared to be agreement, then turned and loped back into the forest, silver-grey coat quickly disappearing among the shadows and moonlight patches beneath the trees. Within moments, it had vanished completely from sight, though Atreus sensed its continued presence somewhere in the surrounding darkness, not watching exactly, but aware of him nonetheless. Returning to his seat by the fire, Atreus added fresh wood to the embers, bringing the flames back to comfortable life. The remaining rabbit lay where he had left it, and he now consumed it thoughtfully, his mind processing the extraordinary experience. while his body reminded him of mundane needs too long ignored. As he ate, a distant howl echoed across the forest, his silver companion announcing its return to the pack. Other voices joined from various directions, acknowledging the communication while adding their own. To most ears, these would be merely the sounds of wolves calling in the night. But Atreus now recognized subtleties within the vocalizations, information being shared about territories and prey, about dangers observed and opportunities discovered. The language of the wild had always surrounded him, he realized. His mother had begun teaching him to hear it. The wolves had expanded that understanding dramatically in a single night. The forest spoke constantly to those who knew how to listen, not in human words, but in patterns and relationships that carried meaning nonetheless. Finishing his meal, Atreus arranged his sleeping furs beside the fire, positioning himself where he could see both flames and sky. The moon continued its arc overhead, stars maintaining their eternal patterns around its path. Tomorrow he would return to the cabin, to his father who would likely be concerned about his overnight absence. He would explain his delay in terms Kratos would accept. A successful hunt, followed by prudent decision to camp rather than risk night travel. The deeper experience, the communion with the wolves and the wisdom they had shared, he would keep mostly to himself for now. Not from distrust, but from recognition that some understandings required proper time and context for sharing. His father approached the world differently than his mother had, no less valid, but grounded in different principles and experiences. Bridging these perspectives was part of what the wolves had identified as his unique path. As sleep began to claim him, Atreus's awareness extended outward one final time, acknowledging the forest that had revealed a deeper layer of itself to him this night. He sensed the wolves moving through distant trees, the owl hunting silent and patient above the canopy, countless smaller lives conducting their nocturnal affairs according to ancient patterns, all connected, all part of an interwoven whole that included him and his father, his memories of his mother, the gods whose machinations seemed simultaneously significant and strangely limited when viewed through the lens of this older, deeper understanding. The last thing Atreus registered before drifting into dreams was a single wolf howl, distant yet clear, his silver guide offering final acknowledgement before the night fully claimed them both. In that sound, he heard confirmation that what had been shared was not ending, but beginning. Wisdom planted like a seed that would continue growing through nights and days to come. Morning arrived with gentle persistence, sunlight filtering through branches to touch Atreus's face, where he lay beside the remnants of his fire. He woke, fully alert, the experiences of the previous night intact within his memory, rather than fading like ordinary dreams. Rising to his feet, he stretched muscles slightly stiff from sleeping on forest ground, then methodically prepared for the journey home. The clearing appeared ordinary in daylight, fire pit containing cold ashes, log seating showing the imprint where he had sat, forests surrounding him with familiar morning sounds of birds and small creatures beginning their daily activities. Yet he perceived subtle differences in how he related to this environment. A shift in awareness that allowed him to notice patterns previously invisible to his attention. As he gathered his belongings and extinguished the last embers properly, Atreus found himself pausing to touch a nearby tree trunk. Beneath his fingers, he sensed the slow, patient life moving through wood and bark. Not dramatically different from his previous understanding, but somehow more immediate, more directly perceived rather than intellectually known. The wolf's gift, he murmured, recognizing this enhanced perception as partial implementation of what had been shared in the moonlit clearing, not dramatic or showy like magical abilities that manipulated physical reality, but perhaps more profound in its quiet way, changing how he experienced the world rather than how he acted upon it. The journey back toward the cabin proceeded efficiently, Atreus moving with confidence through terrain that seemed increasingly readable to his developing awareness. He noticed signs of the wolves' passage, subtle marks ordinary hunters might overlook, indications of their territory and movements that told stories about their lives in this forest. Twice he paused, sensing his silver companion watching from concealed positions, not following exactly, but maintaining awareness of his progress through shared territory. He offered no obvious acknowledgement, understanding that this subtle connection required no dramatic recognition, but simply quiet acceptance of mutual awareness. When he finally approached the cabin clearing around midday, Atreus saw Kratos chopping wood with characteristic focused efficiency. His father paused mid-swing as Atreus emerged from the tree line, eyes quickly assessing for signs of injury or distress, before returning to their usual stoic expression. "You did not return yesterday," Kratos stated simply, neither accusation nor question in his tone, merely observation requiring explanation. "The hunt led farther than expected," Atreus replied, approaching with the confidence of one who had made sound decisions. "Rather than risk night travel, I made camp until morning." Kratos nodded once, accepting this reasoning as aligned with his own teachings about practical wilderness judgment. "You encountered no difficulties?" Atreus considered how to answer truthfully, while honoring the special nature of his experience with the wolves. "I was visited by wolves in the night," he said finally. "They showed me something of their ways." His father's expression remained unchanged, though his eyes studied Atreus more carefully. "Wolves rarely approach humans without purpose," he observed. "What did you learn from this encounter?" In this simple question, Atreus recognized an opening. His father's acknowledgement that wisdom might come from unexpected sources, that nature itself often taught lessons worth heeding. The gap between his parents' perspectives was perhaps not as wide as he sometimes imagined. "Some paths connect what appears separate," Atreus replied, the words emerging naturally despite their philosophical nature. "And that standing between different worlds can be a position of unique understanding, rather than divided loyalty." Kratos was silent for a moment, his axe resting against the chopping block as he fully considered his son's words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried unusual gentleness beneath its customary gruffness. "Your mother would approve of this wisdom," he said. "She always saw connections where others perceived only boundaries." In this acknowledgement, Atreus felt something important shift between them. Not dramatic transformation, but subtle rebalancing that honored both the practical survival knowledge Kratos emphasized and the deeper understanding of natural patterns Faye had valued. The wolves had shown him not a rejection of either perspective, but the potential strength in their integration. As father and son walked together toward the cabin, Atreus glanced back once at the forest edge. For just a moment he glimpsed silver-grey fur among the shadows, his wolf guide observing this reunion before melting back into the depths of trees and undergrowth. Not goodbye, he understood, but merely transition to a different kind of connection, one that would continue through howls carried on night winds, and wisdom unfolding through dreams and quiet moments of reflection. The forest had always surrounded their home, had always been part of their daily existence. But now, Atreus recognized it not merely as environment, but as teacher and community. ancient wisdom embodied in living forms that had offered him connection to understanding deeper than written knowledge. Like the wolf that walks between wild and tame, he would continue his own journey between different ways of being, carrying the night's gifts forward into whatever challenges await. Overhead, though invisible in daylight, he knew the moon continued its eternal cycle, just as he continued his own growth, guided by both father's strength and mother's wisdom, by Wolf's ancient knowledge and his own emerging understanding of his unique place within the patterns of existence. Many days had passed since Atreus's encounter with the wolves under the moonlit sky. The lessons learned during that night had settled into his being, subtly influencing how he moved through the world, how he interpreted the forest's many voices. Though he had not returned to the sacred clearing, he often felt the presence of his silver guide in the distance, a watchful companion maintaining their connection across the woodland realm. Spring had arrived in full force, transforming the previously snow-dusted landscape into a vibrant tapestry of new life. The trees that surrounded their cabin had unfurled tender leaves in countless shades of green. Wildflowers carpeted forest clearings in brilliant displays of color, and birdsong filled the air from dawn until dusk. Even Kratos, typically unmoved by such seasonal changes, had acknowledged the practical benefits of improved hunting and gathering conditions. On this particular morning, with the sun barely risen above the eastern hills, Atreus found himself drawn to explore a section of the forest he and his father rarely visited, a dense grove of ancient trees that lay within a day's journey to the west of their home. Something about the quality of the wind that had blown throughout the night, carrying whispers that tugged at the edges of his dreams, suggested significance awaiting discovery in that direction. The forest had grown quiet as afternoon faded toward evening, the usual chorus of birds settling into drowsy silence as shadows lengthened beneath ancient trees. Atreus moved carefully through familiar territory, bow secured across his back, following tracks that only his trained eye could discern amid fallen leaves and soft earth. His father had remained at their cabin, tending to weapons and provisions, while entrusting his son with a solitary hunting expedition. A small but significant indication of Kratos' growing confidence in the boy's abilities. "Stay within the boundaries we've established," his father had instructed, voice characteristically stern, yet carrying undertones of concern that Atreus had learned to recognize. "Return before full dark. The forest changes when daylight fades." This warning was unnecessary. Atreus knew well the transformation that came with twilight, when familiar landmarks took on different aspects and ordinary sounds acquired new significance. Yet he appreciated the reminder, understanding it stemmed from protective instinct rather than doubt in his capabilities. Their relationship had evolved subtly but meaningfully in recent months, mutual respect growing alongside shared experiences that bound them together more securely than blood alone could accomplish. The boy paused beside a massive oak, fingers tracing the rough bark as he oriented himself. Though still within established hunting grounds, he had ventured slightly farther than usual, drawn by tracks suggesting deer had moved in unexpected patterns recently. This change in wildlife behavior warranted investigation. Either some natural shift had occurred, or perhaps a new predator had entered their territory. Either possibility required understanding for future hunting success. As he knelt to examine disturbed soil near exposed roots, Atreus noticed an unusual quality to the air. A subtle vibration that seemed to hum just below the threshold of hearing, felt more through bone and sinew than through ears. He straightened, senses suddenly alert, gaze scanning surrounding trees with renewed attention. The sensation wasn't threatening, carrying no hint of danger that might trigger immediate defensive response, yet its unfamiliarity demanded caution. The vibration seemed to emanate from deeper within the forest, beyond the invisible boundary he and his father had established during previous explorations. Atreus hesitated, weighing curiosity against explicit instruction. The responsible choice would be turning back, reporting this phenomenon to Kratos before investigating further. Yet something about the gentle resonance called to him specifically. Not a general lure that might attract any passing creature, but a connection that seemed to recognize something in his particular nature. "Just a little farther," he murmured, justifying the decision to himself. "Enough to understand what it is, then back before father could possibly worry." Decision made, Atreus advanced with heightened caution, every sense extended to maximum awareness. The vibration grew gradually more distinct as he progressed, resolving itself into something almost musical. Not melody in conventional sense, but harmonics that flowed and shifted like water finding paths among stones. The trees themselves seemed to be conducting this subtle symphony, their massive trunks serving as resonance chambers for energies flowing upward from roots buried deep in ancient soil. The forest's character changed subtly around him, trees growing more massive, their bark displaying patterns unlike those in more familiar territories. Moss clung to their trunks in elaborate arrangements that almost suggested deliberate design rather than random growth. The canopy above grew denser as well, filtering afternoon light into diffuse green-gold illumination that shifted and dappled with the gentle movement of branches stirred by high breezes unfelt at ground level. Atreus recognized he had crossed the established boundary some minutes earlier, yet found himself unable to turn back before identifying the source of these unusual phenomena. His mother had taught him to respect the forest's mysteries while simultaneously encouraging understanding through careful observation. This balanced approach guided him now, maintaining alert caution while permitting necessary exploration to expand knowledge of their surroundings. The humming vibration continued, intensifying, now clearly audible rather than merely felt. It manifested as complex harmonics that seemed to shift in response to his movements, as if the forest were somehow aware of his presence and adjusting its communications accordingly. This reactive quality suggested intelligence of sorts, though perhaps not consciousness as humans typically understood it. More like the distributed awareness that allowed plants to respond to environmental changes without centralized thought. The trees had grown so massive that 10 men with outstretched arms could scarcely encircle their trunks. Their branches extended horizontally at impossible lengths, creating cathedral-like spaces beneath that echoed with the forest's harmonious vibrations. Moss and lichen displayed colors beyond the usual forest palette, subtle blues and purples mingling with expected greens, occasionally catching light in ways that suggested bioluminescent properties that would likely become more evident as daylight continued fading. Atreus paused beneath a particularly massive oak, its trunk gnarled into formations resembling faces caught in expressions of serene contemplation. The humming seemed especially concentrated here, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet and resonating in his chest when he placed a palm against the ancient bark. Something about this tree felt significant, not merely older or larger than its neighbors, but somehow more connected to whatever force generated the pervasive harmonics. "You've come," a voice whispered, so integrated with the ambient forest sounds that Atreus initially failed to recognize it as distinct communication. "The wolf's blood walks among us again." The boy spun, bow instinctively in hand, though not yet drawn, seeking the speaker among surrounding shadows. No human figure revealed itself, no obvious creature that might have formed such words. The forest remained peaceful around him, showing no signs of threat or disturbance beyond the ongoing harmonic resonance that had initially drawn his exploration. "Who's there?" he called, keeping his voice measured despite sudden alertness. His mother had taught him that fear often created the very dangers it anticipated, while calm assessment frequently revealed apparent threats as mere misunderstandings. "We are," came the response, seeming to emanate from multiple directions simultaneously. "The grove, the rooted ones, the rememberers." Now Atreus understood, or believed he did. The voice emerged not from any individual entity, but from the trees themselves, or perhaps from something that dwelled among them, using their resonant properties to communicate. Such phenomena were not unprecedented in his experience. His mother had spoken of ancient groves where boundaries between ordinary reality and spiritual domains grew permeable, allowing communications that conventional understanding would dismiss as impossible. "I am Atreus," he responded, lowering his bow while maintaining readiness for unexpected developments. "Son of Fae and Kratos. I followed your music here." A sound rippled through surrounding trees, something akin to laughter, though lacking human inflection, more like wind moving through countless leaves in coordinated patterns. Not music as your kind creates it, but the song of root and soil, of sap flow and sunlight transformation. You hear it because you carry connections most humans have forgotten. Atreus considered this assertion thoughtfully. His mother had indeed suggested his mixed heritage might manifest in unusual perceptions beyond typical human capacity. These limited manifestations had emerged with increasing frequency following their journey to scatter her ashes. Awareness of energetic patterns that Kratos acknowledged but couldn't directly perceive. Occasional moments when animals responded to him differently than they did to his father. "What connections?" he asked, curiosity temporarily overriding caution. This encounter presented rare opportunity to understand aspects of his nature that remained mysterious even to himself. "Wolf blood," the grey voice responded, "not merely symbolic kinship, but actual lineage. Distant yet persistent. The great wolves remember their scattered descendants, even those diluted through generations of divergence. Your mother carried this heritage. Now you express it in new ways." This revelation aligned with fragments Atreus had pieced together from his mother's occasional references to her ancestors. Stories involving great wolves that he had interpreted as metaphorical rather than literal. That actual wolf blood might flow through his veins both disturbed and fascinated him, adding another complexity to his already multi-layered heritage. "Is that why I was drawn here?" he asked, gaze traveling upward along massive tree trunks toward canopy that now glowed with emerging evening light. "Because of this wolf connection?" "Partly," the grove acknowledged, "but also because transition approaches. Moment when boundaries thin and pathways open between states ordinarily separate. The wolf ancestors gather during such convergences, and those carrying their legacy may hear the calling." As if confirming this explanation, a distant howl sounded from deeper within the grove, not threatening but declarative, like announcement of presence rather than hunting cry. The sound carried unusual resonance, echoing among ancient trees with harmonic overtones that ordinary wolf vocalizations wouldn't generate. Another howl answered from different direction, then another, until the grove filled with overlapping calls that blended with the existing harmonic vibrations into complex symphony. Deeply come, the grove voice explained. First as sound, then as essence, finally as manifestation if conditions permit. The transition strengthens as daylight fades completely. Atreus recognized he should depart immediately, returning to the cabin before his father grew concerned enough to begin searching. Yet the phenomenon unfolding around him presented opportunity too significant to abandon. Chance to understand aspects of his heritage that might prove crucial to their ongoing journey. Kratos emphasized knowledge as tactical advantage, surely gathering information about potential allies or significant bloodline connections, qualified as responsible reconnaissance rather than reckless curiosity. I should tell my father about this place, he suggested, compromise between departure and continued observation. He would want to know about the wolves, about any potential connections that might help us. The harmonics surrounding him shifted subtly, suggesting response equivalent to thoughtful consideration. The marked one perceives differently, the grove finally replied. What reveals itself to wolf blood remains invisible to god blood, diluted by mortal existence. His understanding comes through you rather than direct experience. Before Atreus could formulate a response to this assessment, movement caught his peripheral vision. Shadow flowing between distant trees with fluid grace, unlike typical forest creatures. He turned sharply, bow raised instinctively, though not yet drawn. The figure had disappeared before he could focus directly upon it, leaving only impression of substantial canine form, moving with purposeful intent. De-manifest already, the grove commented, harmonics shifting toward higher register, suggesting something akin to surprise. The convergence progresses more rapidly than anticipated. Your presence accelerates the transition. Another wolf figure appeared briefly between trees to Atreus's right. Larger than natural wolves he had encountered during hunting expeditions. This one lingered momentarily before dissolving back into shadow. Yellow eyes meeting his with unmistakable intelligence and apparent recognition. Not threatening assessment, but acknowledgement between connected entities. What exactly is happening? Atreus asked, maintaining outward calm despite racing thoughts. What transition are you talking about? The ancient conjunction, the grove explained, when wolf spirits that usually dwell between ordinary states can manifest briefly within the physical realm. They gather to renew connections, share collective wisdom, prepare for coming changes that affect all interconnected bloodlines. Those carrying their legacy, even diluted through generations, serve as anchors facilitating this manifestation. More wolf figures had begun appearing among surrounding trees, maintaining distance but clearly visible as twilight deepened forest shadows. Larger than natural wolves, their forms seemed partially transparent, internal luminescence outlining bones and organs within shadowy exteriors. Eyes glowed with amber light, fixed upon Atreus with collective attention that communicated curiosity rather than aggression. The boy felt inexplicable calm despite circumstances that might ordinarily trigger defensive response. Something about these spirit wolves generated familiarity beyond rational explanation, recognition that operated at level deeper than conscious thought, as if cellular memory responded to ancestral connection, independent of personal experience. The sensation resembled his bond with his mother, though less direct and immediate. DMB know you, the grove confirmed, reading his emotional response through means Atreus couldn't identify. Blood recognizes blood across generations, across transformations between physical and spiritual manifestation. The original wolf ancestors remember all descendants, regardless how distant or diluted the connection has become. The harmonic vibrations suffusing the grove had intensified further, now visible as subtle luminescence, flowing upward through massive tree trunks from roots buried deep below. This energy connected with similar flows emerging from the spectral wolves, creating complex patterns resembling vast neural network binding all present entities, trees, wolves, and human boy, into temporary unified system. "What do they want from me?" Atreus asked, sensing purpose behind this extraordinary gathering, rather than mere coincidental intersection. "Recognition," came the reply, harmonic tones suggesting concept more complex than the single word could adequately convey. "Acknowledgement of connection. Preparation for role you cannot yet comprehend, but will eventually fulfill when pathways converge beyond current divergence." As darkness settled more completely across the forest, the wolf spirits grew increasingly substantial, their forms solidifying until they appeared almost physically present, despite maintaining subtle translucence that distinguished them from ordinary creatures. Their numbers had increased as well, perhaps 30 now visible among surrounding trees, arranged in roughly circular formation, with Atreus at center. The largest wolf, massive creature whose shoulders would reach Kratos' chest if standing beside him, approached with deliberate grace that communicated both power and restraint. Unlike the others, this one's form appeared completely solid, indistinguishable from physical manifestation except for subtle luminescence visible within its thick silver-grey fur. Eyes like molten gold studded Atreus with intelligence that clearly transcended animal consciousness. The first hunter, the grove identified in harmonics that conveyed reverence, progenitor of bloodlines that spread across realms when boundaries were more permeable, your most distant ancestor through maternal lineage. Atreus stood motionless as the massive wolf circled him slowly, maintaining respectful distance while clearly conducting detailed assessment. No aggression colored this evaluation, merely careful observation, like craftsmen examining materials before determining appropriate application. The boy sensed approval growing as this inspection continued, though communicated through subtle shifts in the creature's posture rather than When the circuit completed, the first hunters sat directly before Atreus, gaze level with the boys, despite different physical configuration. The harmonic vibrations surrounding them intensified into focused resonance that somehow facilitated wordless communication. Not language as humans understood it, but direct conceptual transfer that bypassed conventional limitations of different species. Through this extraordinary connection, Atreus received fragmentary understanding, impressions of vast timescales, of bloodlines diverging and reconnecting like flowing streams, of cycles completing and beginning anew with slight variations that gradually accumulated into significant changes. His own position within these patterns emerged as point of particular convergence, where seemingly separate lineages reunited with potential to catalyze transformation beyond ordinary progression. The first hunter communicated not through words but through sensory impressions, scent of ancient forests pristine before human alteration, taste of clean water flowing directly from mountain springs, feeling of pack movement through landscape with perfect coordinated awareness, sound of ancestral howls, establishing territorial boundaries measured in days of travel rather than mere miles. These sensations carried emotional context as well. Belonging, purpose, responsibility, to to something larger than individual existence. To get the animal imagery, the grove translates Oedveism. The grove translated. Harmonics shaped into approximation of human language, though clearly inadequate to capture full complexity of the exchange. Recognition of potential developing within you. Abilities that transcend ordinary classification as either human or divine. The wolf aspects of your heritage activate alongside other bloodline manifestations, providing balance and grounding against potentially destructive expressions. This last reference clearly indicated his father's violent divine legacy, Spartan rage that Atreus had witnessed and occasionally experienced himself, though with less catastrophic consequences thus far. The concept of counterbalancing influence made intuitive sense, explaining perhaps why he sometimes felt inexplicable calm precisely when circumstances might otherwise trigger uncontrolled emotional response. The first hunter rose, approaching closer until barely arm's length separated them. Without conscious decision, Atreus extended his hand, palm outward in gesture that seemed appropriate, though not derived from any instruction or observed precedent. The massive wolf pressed cold nose briefly against his skin, contact sending electric sensation up his arm and throughout his body. Not painful, but intensely energizing, like plunging into icy stream after exhausting exertion. Through this brief physical connection, something transferred. Not object or substance, but potential. Capacity previously dormant that now stirred toward eventual awakening. Atreus sensed this activation wouldn't manifest immediately or dramatically, instead developing gradually alongside his natural maturation, integration, rather than sudden transformation. The seed awakens, the grove confirmed. It will grow according to choices you make, experiences you absorb, challenges you face. Unlike divine power that often imposes its nature regardless of vessel's character, Wolf Legacy responds to and reflects the individual's developed essence. What ultimately manifests depends on who you become through decisions large and small. The first hunter stepped back, rejoining the circle of spirit wolves that had maintained respectful distance throughout this exchange. As if responding to unheard signal, they began moving in coordinated circuit, flowing around Atreus and the central oak in clockwise spiral that gradually accelerated. Their movements generated visible energy patterns, luminous trails persisting briefly before fading, creating elaborate spiral glyph centered on the boy's position. The harmonic vibration peaked in corresponding crescendo, tree trunks now visibly pulsing with flowing energy that connected with the wolf's spiral movement. The entire grove had transformed into single energetic system, every element, plant, animal, soil, air, participating in coordinated expression that transcended ordinary categories of existence. Within this extraordinary manifestation, Atreus experienced momentary perception beyond typical limitations, sensing connections extending far beyond immediate surroundings. He glimpsed distant mountains where other wolf spirits gathered in similar convergence, deep oceans where massive entities moved in comparable spiral patterns, even stars overhead participating in cosmic version of the same fundamental expression. These disparate manifestations appeared simultaneously separate and unified, different aspects of underlying pattern, too vast for complete comprehension, yet intuitively recognizable through inherited connection. The vision lasted perhaps 30 seconds before gradually fading, the wolves' circular movements slowing until they stood once more in stationary formation surrounding Adria and the central oak. The harmonics similarly diminished to previous levels, though maintaining subtle difference in tonal quality, suggesting permanent alteration rather than simple return to initial state. Something had changed fundamentally within the grove, within the wolves, within Atreus himself. Transition completed that could not be reversed. "It is done," the grove announced, harmonics conveying satisfaction alongside something akin to wistfulness. The recognition is established, the connection reinforced, the potential awakened. What follows depends on choices yet unmade, circumstances yet undeveloped, conflicts yet unresolved. The first hunter regarded Atreus once more with penetrating gaze that seemed to assess not merely current state, but multiple potential futures branching from this pivotal moment. Whatever this evaluation revealed appeared satisfactory, as the massive wolf inclined its head slightly in gesture, unmistakably conveying acknowledgement and approval before turning away. As if this movement served as signal, the gathered spirit wolves began fading gradually from perception, not departing physically, but transitioning between states of manifestation, returning to condition that normally remained inaccessible to ordinary awareness. Their forms grew increasingly transparent, internal luminescence intensifying briefly before dissolving completely back into forest shadows. The first hunter remained visible longest, maintaining solid presence until others had completely disappeared. Before following its companions into transitional state, it turned once more toward Atreus, eyes communicating final message without words. Awareness established could not be extinguished, regardless of physical separation. Connection forged would persist independent of conscious attention. Heritage recognized would continue unfolding according to its nature, alongside other bloodline influences. With this wordless farewell, the ancient spirit faded finally from perception, leaving Atreus standing alone beside the massive oak, in forest now returned to apparent normalcy. Yet subtle differences persisted, perceptible to his enhanced awareness. Harmonic vibration continuing at almost subliminal level, occasional flickers of movement glimpsed peripherally, sense of watchful presence, neither threatening nor intrusive but attentively observant. Ismon remained present though not visible, the grove confirmed, voice emerging once more from ambient forest sounds. The convergence created lasting thinning between states, allowing ongoing awareness across boundaries typically impermeable. You will sense their presence occasionally, particularly during twilight transitions or moments of heightened need. Atreus absorbed this information with quiet acceptance, recognizing profound significance in what had transpired, while understanding his comprehension remained necessarily incomplete. Such partial understanding characterized much of his experience recently, fragments gradually accumulating toward coherent whole that would likely require years to fully integrate. "I should return," he said finally, aware that considerably more time had passed than his original intention when following the harmonic vibration into unfamiliar territory. "My father will be concerned." "The marked one approaches already," the grove responded, harmonics suggesting something between amusement and respect. "His connection to you transcends ordinary bonds, allowing perception of your general state regardless of physical separation." He sensed the energy convergence, if not its specific nature. This didn't surprise Atreus. His father possessed awareness that defied simple categorization, abilities developed through centuries of extraordinary experience rather than inherited traits. That Kratos would detect unusually significant energy manifestations, particularly those involving his son, seemed entirely plausible, regardless of the grove's assertion about limited perception. "Will he be able to see this place as I do?" Atreus asked, genuinely curious whether his father would perceive the grove's special qualities or merely encounter apparently ordinary forest. Differently came the thoughtful response after brief harmonic fluctuation suggesting consideration. His perceptions followed different pathways, attentive to potential threats and tactical advantages rather than inherent connections. He will sense power, but not necessarily relationship. Caution defines his approach, where curiosity guides yours. Before Atreus could respond, familiar sound reached him. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching from the direction of their cabin, moving with purpose, but not panic. His father had indeed come searching, concern motivating pursuit without suggesting immediate danger requiring urgency. The boy felt momentary apprehension, not fear of punishment, but concern about explaining experience that defied ordinary description. "Tell him what you witnessed," the grove suggested, seeming to read his uncertainty. His understanding expands through your perception, as yours develops through his experience. Together you comprehend what neither grasps completely alone. This complementary awareness serves greater purpose still unfolding. The massive figure of Kratos emerged between distant trees, moving with characteristic economy that combined power with precise control. Though not running, his pace covered ground with remarkable efficiency, closing distance rapidly once Atreus' location registered. The Leviathan axe remained secured across his back rather than in hand, suggesting assessment of unusual circumstances rather than anticipated threat. "Father," Atreus called, stepping away from the central oak toward the approaching figure. "I'm here. I'm fine." Kratos slowed, scrutinizing both his son and surrounding forest with experienced warrior's assessment, identifying potential dangers while calculating optimal responses should threats materialize. Finding no immediate hazards, his expression shifted slightly from alert readiness to questioning concern, though most observers would note little difference in his perpetually stern countenance. "You crossed the boundary," he stated, voice characteristically deep and measured. Not accusation, but simple acknowledgement of fact, observation rather than judgment. "I know," Atreus admitted. "I felt something, heard something, that seemed important to investigate. I was going to return and tell you about it, but then..." He gestured around them, struggling to articulate the extraordinary experience in conventional terms. Kratos studied their surroundings with heightened attention, clearly sensing something unusual despite probable limitations in his specific perception. His gaze lingered on the massive central oak, eyes narrowing slightly as if detecting anomalies invisible to ordinary observation. What happened here? Atreus considered how to explain events that had unfolded partly through sensory channels his father might not access directly. "I met spirits, wolf spirits. They're connected to Mother's bloodline, to me. They performed some kind of ceremony or recognition ritual." He touched his chest. "Something awakened inside me. Not dangerous, just potential. Heritage from Mother's side that balances other aspects." Though Kratos' expression remained stoic, his eyes reflected complex emotional response, concern mingled with resignation, and perhaps subtle pride that his son faced extraordinary circumstances with growing capability. He had long accepted that Atreus would encounter phenomena beyond ordinary experience. What mattered was developing judgment to navigate such situations appropriately. "Dear spirits?" he asked carefully. "Their intention toward you?" "Positive," Atreus assured him without hesitation. "Protective even. They're connected to me through Mother. ancestral spirits watching over their descendants. They said the wolf blood in me helps balance the other bloodline traits. This delicate reference to his father's divine heritage and its potentially destructive manifestations required no elaboration between them. Kratos absorbed this information with characteristic thoroughness, neither immediately accepting nor dismissively rejecting. His extended existence had exposed him to countless extraordinary phenomena. Additional revelation about his son's complex heritage represented not shocking development, but further peace in continually expanding understanding. "You hear them still?" he asked, demonstrating perceptive grasp of significant details despite potential limitations in direct experience. Atreus nodded. "Not words exactly, but presence. Awareness. The grove itself speaks too. The trees, the soil, everything connected together into something larger." As if confirming this description, subtle harmonic vibration intensified briefly around them, becoming potentially perceptible even to less sensitive awareness. Kratos tilted his head slightly, clearly detecting something beyond ordinary forest sounds, though his experience would likely differ substantially from his son's more integrated perception. "There is power here," he acknowledged, assessment reflecting tactical consideration rather than spiritual appreciation. "Old power, neither Aesir nor Vanir." His gaze returned to Atreus. "It responds to you specifically?" "To Mother's bloodline through me," the boy clarified. "The wolf connection recognizes its own, even generations removed. They said I serve as anchor between worlds during transitional periods, helping them manifest temporarily between their usual state and our physical realm." This explanation aligned with other manifestations of Atreus's developing abilities. Growing tendency to facilitate connections between seemingly separate categories or states that others perceived as fundamentally distinct. This bridging function appeared increasingly central to his nature, operating across multiple domains from linguistic translation. Kratos considered this information with characteristic thoroughness before responding. These connections, potential advantage or vulnerability. Always the warrior's assessment, evaluating new developments primarily through tactical lens, regardless of other significance. "Both, probably," Atreus answered honestly. "Like most abilities, useful in certain circumstances, potentially complicated in others. The spirits seem protective toward me, which could help in dangerous situations. But their appearance might attract attention from others who sense such manifestations." His father nodded, appreciating straightforward analysis rather than enthusiastic but uncritical acceptance. They had discussed frequently how every capability brought corresponding responsibility, every advantage its potential complications. Developing mature judgment required recognizing both aspects, rather than focusing exclusively on either benefits or liabilities. "You believe this connection strengthens you?" Kratos asked, question reflecting genuine interest in his son's assessment, rather than leading toward predetermined conclusion. Atreus considered thoughtfully before responding. "Not raw strength like yours," he clarified. "Different kind of capacity. Integration, balance, harmony between seemingly opposite aspects." He touched his chest again, indicating internal development rather than external manifestation. "Mother's heritage balancing yours, creating something new that's neither simply one nor other." This insight reflected growing self-awareness beyond chronological age. understanding developing through extraordinary circumstances that accelerated natural maturation. Kratos acknowledged this perspective with slight nods suggesting approval of the observation's wisdom, regardless of its specific accuracy, which remained to be determined through future experience. "We should return," he stated, practical consideration reasserting priority over philosophical exploration. Light fades completely. The path grows difficult, even for experienced travelers. Atreus recognized both literal truth in this statement and implicit acknowledgement that sufficient discovery had occurred for initial encounter. Whatever this grove represented, whatever connection had awakened, would remain accessible for future exploration, rather than requiring immediate complete understanding. Patient development characterized true wisdom, as both his parents had demonstrated through different approaches. "I'd like to come back," he said, request rather than demand. "Learn more about this connection, about Mother's heritage. There's knowledge here that might help us on our journey." Kratos considered briefly before nodding agreement. "Together," he qualified. "Unknown forces warrant cautious approach, regardless of apparent benevolence." This stipulation reflected not distrust of his son's judgment, but pragmatic assessment that combined perspective offered optimal evaluation of unusual phenomena. As they prepared to depart, Atreus turned once more toward the massive central oak, placing palm briefly against its ancient bark in gesture of respect and acknowledgement. The harmonic vibration responded with subtle intensification, communicating recognition that transcended conventional language. "Thank you," the boy said quietly, "for showing me this connection, this heritage." "The awakening continues beyond single encounter," the grove replied, harmonics audible primarily to Atreus, though perhaps partially perceptible to his father as well. "What begins here unfolds gradually through experiences yet to come. Return when transition between day and night next occurs. Wolves gather then, most naturally, boundaries thin most accessibly." Atreus nodded understanding before rejoining his father, who had observed this exchange with characteristic patient attentiveness, despite probable limitations in direct perception. Together, they began retracing their path through darkening forest, the boy leading initially until they reached more familiar territory, where established routes became clearly identifiable even in deepening twilight. As they walked, Atreus described his extraordinary experience in greater detail. The first hunter's appearance, the spiral movement of gathered spirits, the momentary vision of connections extending far beyond immediate surroundings. Atreus listened with unwavering attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped organize seemingly disparate elements into coherent understanding. "A mother never spoke directly about wolf heritage," Atreus noted thoughtfully. "She told stories featuring wolves, but presented them as ordinary tales rather than family history. I wonder why she kept that connection hidden when she taught me so much about other aspects of her people. Protection, perhaps," Kratos suggested after considering the question. "Knowledge attracts attention. Gods, especially Odin, seek power through others' heritage and abilities. What remains unknown cannot be specifically targeted." This explanation aligned with Faye's demonstrated pattern of careful concealment regarding significant aspects of their family's nature and purpose. Their home had been protected by powerful wards and precisely carved runes, their activities strategically limited to avoid drawing unwanted attention, their true names and lineage shielded behind mundane appearance that disguised extraordinary nature. The Grove mentioned coming changes affecting all interconnected bloodlines, Atreus recalled. That sounds like Ragnarok prophecies, but somehow different. Less fixed, more adaptable? They suggested multiple possibilities rather than single predetermined outcome. Kratos considered this interpretation thoughtfully. Throughout their journey, they had encountered various perspectives regarding prophesied events, some presenting absolute inevitability, others suggesting flexibility within broader pattern. Their own experiences increasingly supported the latter view, as choices they made appeared to alter trajectories that supposed experts had presented as immutable. Prophecy reflects perspective, he observed. Limited beings perceive limited possibilities, mistaking partial vision for complete understanding. True wisdom recognizes pattern without surrendering to predetermined conclusion. This philosophical observation impressed Atreus, representing relatively rare articulation of the complex perspective his father typically demonstrated through action rather than exposition. Such moments provided valuable glimpses into Kratos' deeper understanding that often remained unexpressed through conventional communication. The wolves seem to know things about what's coming, the boy continued. Not specific events exactly, but patterns, cycles, how different forces interact. They're preparing somehow, gathering during transitional periods to share collective wisdom and strengthen connections across boundaries. Night had fully claimed the forest as they conversed, moon occasionally visible through breaks in canopy overhead, providing sufficient illumination for their enhanced perception, despite darkness that would render ordinary travelers effectively blind. Their pace remained steady, familiarity with terrain allowing confident progress despite limited visibility. Knowledge from different sources builds more complete understanding, Kratos observed. These wolf spirits offer perspective, separate from Aesir, Vanir, giants, dwarfs, potentially valuable regardless of specific accuracy. Wisdom emerges from multiple viewpoints, considered together rather than single source accepted without question. This integrated approach characterized their developing methodology for navigating increasingly complex circumstances, gathering varied perspectives, identifying patterns and discrepancies, forming provisional conclusions subject to revision through additional experience, neither fully accepting nor dismissively rejecting any single information source, instead maintaining critical assessment while remaining open to potential validity. As they approached their cabin, warm light visible through shuttered windows indicating fire maintained during their absence, Atreus felt profound appreciation for this balanced methodology that combined his father's hard-earned pragmatism with his mother's intuitive connection to deeper patterns. Their complementary approaches, initially appearing contradictory, increasingly revealed themselves as necessarily interdependent aspects of more comprehensive understanding. The Grove said, "We comprehend together what neither grasps completely alone," he shared, finding this observation particularly significant, that our different perceptions serve some greater purpose, still unfolding. Kratos absorbed this assessment with characteristic thoroughness, recognizing truth that aligned with their ongoing experience. Their journey had repeatedly demonstrated how limitations in individual perspective could be overcome through combined awareness. His tactical expertise complementing Atreus' intuitive connections, his hard-earned wisdom balancing his son's emerging insights. Strength comes through complementary abilities, he acknowledged as they reached their cabin's threshold, not weakness to require another's perception, but wisdom to recognize value in perspectives beyond our own. This philosophical conclusion served as fitting summation to extraordinary afternoon and evening that had begun with simple hunting expedition before expanding into profound revelation about heritage and connection. As they entered their home's sheltering warmth, Atreus carried not just new understanding about his mother's lineage, but deeper appreciation for the balanced integration this heritage offered. Counterweight to divine power that might otherwise manifest destructively without appropriate grounding. Outside in deepening night, the forest continued its subtle communications. Wind through branches creating whispers that those with appropriate sensitivity might recognize as meaningful expression rather than random sound. Among distant trees, occasional flickers of movement suggested watchful presence, maintaining protective attention without intrusive interference. The wolf spirits had withdrawn from physical perception, but remained accessible across thinned boundaries. Ancestral guardians observing their descendants' continuing development with patient interest. Within the grove's heart, harmonic vibration maintained steady resonance, energy flowing through ancient root systems, connecting massive trees into a unified network that extended far beyond visible manifestation. This living system preserved knowledge accumulated through centuries of patient observation, maintaining awareness that transcended individual limitations, while remaining fundamentally connected to natural processes rather than separate from them. The Whispering Grove had revealed its secrets to one carrying appropriate heritage, awakening dormant potential that would continue developing through experiences yet to come. Connection established could not be severed by physical separation or temporal distance. Heritage recognized would unfold according to its nature, alongside other bloodline influences, wolf and god, human and giant, seemingly contradictory elements integrating into unique expression, greater than simple sum of constituent parts. Under star-filled sky, the forest settled into night's peaceful rhythm, ambient sounds providing soothing background for creatures seeking rest after day's activities. Within their cabin, father and son similarly prepared for necessary sleep. Extraordinary revelations integrated into ongoing journey that continued revealing new dimensions with each significant development. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges requiring renewed attention, but understanding gained could not be lost, regardless what circumstances might arise. The Whispering Grove awaited future visits, ancient trees maintaining patient vigilance through time measured in centuries, rather than mere days or years. Wolf spirits continued their existence across permeable boundaries, occasionally visible during transitional periods but constantly present for those with perception extending beyond ordinary limitations. Heritage awakened would continue unfolding according to its nature, potential developing through choices yet unmade, experiences yet encountered, challenges yet overcome. In dreams that night, Atreus ran through moonlit forest alongside massive silver-grey wolf, their movements perfectly synchronized despite apparent physical differences. Not pursuit or flight, but joyful expression of shared nature, celebration of connection transcending ordinary categories and limitations. The first hunter's golden eyes reflected understanding beyond words, communication operating at level deeper than conscious thought, heritage recognized and acknowledged across generations, despite intervening distance and transformation. This dream connection represented neither mere fancy nor direct communication, but rather emerging integration of awakened potential within his developing identity, wolf and human, divine and mortal, seemingly separate aspects, finding harmony through balanced expression rather than dominance of any single element. The spiral pattern, created during ceremonial gathering, continued unfolding within him, connecting apparently separate elements into coherent whole, greater than simple combination of constituent parts. Beneath ancient trees, the whispering grove maintained its patient vibration, harmonics flowing through living network extending far beyond visible manifestation. The forest breathed with slow, measured rhythm, each cycle witnessing gradual transformation that accumulated through time into profound change, despite appearing negligible within any single moment. This pattern extended through all scales of existence, from cellular processes to cosmic cycles. Fundamental expression manifesting through countless diverse forms, while maintaining essential continuity beneath apparent difference. The wolf spirits had recognized this pattern operating within Atreus's heritage, connecting past to future through present choices, bloodlines converging to create potential transcending original sources, balance emerging through integration rather than opposition. What would ultimately develop remained necessarily undetermined, dependent on decisions yet unmade, experiences yet encountered, challenges yet overcome. But foundation had been established, connection acknowledged, potential awakened that would continue unfolding according to its fundamental nature within the broader tapestry of intertwined destinies. Under starlight and shadow, the whispering grove continued its ancient vigilance, patient witness to cycles unfolding through time measured not in moments, but in millennia. Within this greater pattern, newly recognized connection represented both continuation and innovation, heritage maintained, while simultaneously transforming through novel expression unique to its particular manifestation. The wolf blood walked again among ancient trees, heritage acknowledged across generations despite intervening distance and transformation, connection established that would persist through challenges yet to come, supporting growth toward destiny still forming through choices large and small. And so our journey through the realms draws to a close for tonight. May Hypnos, god of sleep, watch over you as you drift through dreams of legendary proportions. If these tales of gods and monsters helped guide you to restful sleep, consider supporting our journey by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories night after night. Remember, these videos play uninterrupted through the night, with no ads to disturb your slumber, just the soothing sounds of mythic realms to accompany your dreams. For those seeking passage to exclusive content, our Patreon offers early access to all videos and special playlists crafted to enhance your sleep. The link awaits in the description below. Until our next journey together, may your sleep be deep, your dreams be mighty, and your rest be undisturbed by the conflicts of gods and men. Sleep well, brave one.